Someone tried to erase her from history. They smashed her statues, chiseled out her name from every temple wall, destroyed her monuments. For 3,000 years she was almost forgotten. Because Hatshepsut didn't just become Egypt's most powerful female pharaoh. She ruled as a man, took male lovers on her own terms, and built an empire that outshone every king before her. And they couldn't handle it. This is the story of the woman who became king, the scandal that rocked ancient Egypt, and the truth about power, gender, and desire that someone desperately wanted buried. Buckle up. This one's a journey. To understand Hatshepsut, you need to understand the Egypt she was born into. This isn't just another pharaoh story. This is about a woman who had to become a god to survive. The year is approximately 1507 BCE. We're in the 18th dynasty, Egypt's golden age. The New Kingdom. The pyramids? Those are already ancient history built over 1,000 years earlier. By Hatshepsut's time, Egypt is the world's superpower. Wealthy beyond imagination. Powerful. Sophisticated. But here's the thing about ancient Egypt. It was a theocracy wrapped in bureaucracy, wrapped in absolute monarchy. The pharaoh wasn't just a political leader, they were a living god. Literally. The embodiment of Horus on earth. The son of Ra, the sun god. Son, not daughter, that's important. Women in ancient Egypt actually had it better than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. They could own property, run businesses, divorce their husbands, serve as priestesses. But ruling as pharaoh? That was reserved for men. Because pharaoh had to perform religious rituals that required? Well, let's just say the symbolism was very male. The pharaoh had to be the symbolic husband of Egypt itself. The father of the nation. The virile, powerful, masculine force that kept Ma'at, cosmic order, in balance. So when Hatshepsut was born, the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Ahmose, she was royal. She was educated. She was powerful. But she was never supposed to rule. Let's talk about her family, because Egyptian royal families make Game of Thrones look simple. Her father, Thutmose I, was a military genius who expanded Egypt's borders into Nubia and the Levant. A conqueror. A warrior king. He had multiple wives, as pharaohs did, and several children. Hatshepsut was his daughter with his great royal wife, meaning she was the most legitimate royal heir you could be, short of being male. But she had half-brothers, sons of lesser wives. And in the tangled politics of Egyptian succession, that mattered. Now here's where it gets messy. Her father's chosen heir was her half-brother, also named Thutmose. We call him Thutmose II. And to keep the royal bloodline pure and consolidate power, guess what happened? Hatshepsut married her half-brother. Yes, ancient Egypt practiced royal incest. It wasn't seen as taboo, it was strategic. The pharaoh's divinity ran in the blood, so marrying within the family kept the divine bloodline concentrated. Brothers married sisters. Uncles married nieces. It was just how things worked. So young Hatshepsut, probably around 12 years old, because ancient royal marriages happened early, became queen to Pharaoh Thutmose II. And here's the first hint of who she really was. She wasn't content being just a queen. Ancient inscriptions from her time as queen show her taking on unusual titles. God's wife of Amun, one of the most powerful religious positions in Egypt. She appeared in temple reliefs, participating in ceremonies usually reserved for pharaohs. She was already pushing boundaries, but she was still just the queen, the woman behind the throne. Then everything changed. Thutmose II died young. Ancient Egypt didn't have great record-keeping about causes of death, but scholars believe he was sickly most of his life. He ruled for maybe 13 years, possibly less. And when he died, Egypt faced a crisis. The heir was Thutmose III, son of Thutmose II and a minor wife named Iset. But here's the problem, he was a child. Maybe 2 years old. Possibly as old as 7. Either way, way too young to rule an empire. Egypt needed a regent. Someone to hold power until the boy king came of age. Enter Hatshepsut. At first it seemed straightforward. She was the great royal wife. The boy's stepmother. The most senior royal woman alive. Of course she'd serve as regent. That's how it worked. For the first couple years of young Thutmose III's reign, that's exactly what happened. Inscriptions show Thutmose III as pharaoh with Hatshepsut as regent and queen. But Hatshepsut wasn't the type to stay in the background. Ancient records show that around year 2 or year 3 of Thutmose III's reign, something extraordinary happened. The inscriptions change. The artwork changes. The titles change. Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh. Not queen regent. Not queen mother. Pharaoh. Co-ruler with Thutmose III at first, but gradually, increasingly, she took center stage. And here's where it gets fascinating. She didn't do this overnight. She was smart, calculated. She built her legitimacy piece by piece. First, she emphasized her royal bloodline. She commissioned inscriptions claiming that her father, Thutmose I, had named her as his successor before he died. Did this really happen? Historians debated. But perception is reality, and Hatshepsut controlled the narrative. Second, she created a divine birth narrative. She had entire temple walls carved with a story that the god Ammonius himself had come to her mother in disguise, impregnated her, and declared that Hatshepsut would rule Egypt. Sound familiar? It should. Male pharaohs use similar stories all the time. Hatshepsut just claimed the same divine right. Third, and this is where it gets really interesting, she started depicting herself as male. Early in her reign, artwork shows her in traditional queen's clothing, a tight-fitting dress, feminine jewelry, clearly female. But gradually the images change. She starts wearing the pharaoh's ceremonial false beard, the Nemes headdress, the striped headcloth we associate with King Tut, the shendit kilt, the short pleated skirt of male pharaohs. She's depicted with a male torso, muscular chest, no breasts. The hieroglyphic inscriptions even start using male grammatical forms when referring to her. His Majesty instead of Her Majesty. She literally transformed herself into a male pharaoh in the official record. But, and this is crucial, she never pretended to be biologically male. Everyone knew she was a woman. The inscriptions sometimes slip and use female forms. Some artwork shows her with feminine features. She kept her birth name, Hatshepsut, which is grammatically feminine. She wasn't trying to fool anyone. She was making a statement. I am Pharaoh. Pharaoh is male. Therefore, I am symbolically male, regardless of my body. It was a gender performance, a deliberate, strategic adoption of masculine royal identity to legitimize her rule. And it worked. For over 20 years, Hatshepsut ruled Egypt as pharaoh. Not just ruled, thrived, prospered, built, conquered, became one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history. But that success came with a price. And with rumors, whispers, scandals. Because a woman with that much power, in a role that male, with control over the entire kingdom, people talked. Let's talk about Senenmut. If you've ever researched Hatshepsut, you've heard this name. Senenmut, her chief steward, her architect, her right-hand man, and probably, her lover. Senenmut came from nowhere. Not royal blood, not noble family. Just a commoner who rose to become the most powerful non-royal person in Egypt during Hatshepsut's reign. Talent, ambition, and a very, very close relationship with the pharaoh. Here's what we know for certain. Senenmut held more titles than almost any other official in Egyptian history. Over 80 titles including Chief Steward of the King, Overseer of all works of the King, Steward of the God's Wife, Hatshepsut's religious title, Tutor to Princess Neferur, Hatshepsut's daughter, Controller of the Hall of the King, Overseer of the granaries, fields, and cattle of Ammonius. The list goes on, and on, and on. This wasn't normal. Even powerful nobles usually held 10 to 20 major titles. Senenmut held 80 plus. He had access to everything. Control over nearly every aspect of Egypt's government and Hatshepsut's personal affairs. But here's where it gets spicy. Ancient Egyptian tomb art followed strict rules. You depicted yourself with your family, your wife, your children, your parents. You showed yourself performing religious duties. You honored the gods and the pharaoh. What you did not do was plaster images of yourself all over the pharaoh's personal monuments. Senenmut did exactly that. Hidden images of Senenmut appear in Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements in ancient Egypt. Behind doors, in alcoves, places where no one would normally look. It's like he was signing his work, or marking his territory. Then there are his tombs. Oh yes, tombs. Plural. Senenmut built himself not one but two elaborate tombs, both near Hatshepsut's own mortuary temple. One tomb, TT-71, is traditional, but the other, TT-353, is literally underneath Hatshepsut's temple with a hidden entrance. Symbolically, it's like saying, I'm with her, for eternity. But the real evidence comes from something they tried to hide. In the 1920s, archaeologists exploring a quarry worker's hut near Deir el-Bahari found graffiti on the walls. Ancient graffiti, drawn by the workers who built Hatshepsut's temple. And what did these workers draw? Extremely explicit sexual images of a man and a woman. The woman is wearing a royal headdress. The man is labeled with hieroglyphs that many scholars interpret as referring to Senenmut. The image shows them engaged in, well, let's just say there's no ambiguity about what's happening. It's pornographic, deliberately crude. Was this ancient gossip? Workers mocking a rumored affair between the pharaoh and her steward? Or was it jealousy and resentment from workers who resented this commoner's power? Either way, people were talking. The relationship between Hatshepsut and Senenmut was scandalous enough that anonymous workers felt comfortable drawing X-rated graffiti about it. Now, modern historians are divided on this. Some say the graffiti is satirical, mockery not evidence. Ancient Egyptian workers loved raunchy humor. Maybe they were just being crude. Others point out that gossip usually has a grain of truth. The workers wouldn't have targeted Senenmut specifically unless there was widespread rumor about him and the pharaoh. So let's look at the circumstantial evidence. Unprecedented power. Senenmut's rise was meteoric and unprecedented. From common birth to controlling virtually every aspect of Egypt's government? That doesn't happen without intimate access to the pharaoh. The kind of access that comes from being in her private chambers, in her confidence, in her bed. Compare him to other high officials in Egyptian history. Most came from established noble families or military backgrounds. They married strategically, built networks of allies. Senenmut? His only connection was Hatshepsut. All his power flowed from her, and vanished when she died. The intimate titles. Senenmut was tutor to Hatshepsut's daughter, Princess Neferur. Artwork shows him holding the young princess in poses usually reserved for parents. He's depicted as her protector and educator. Would Hatshepsut give a random official that level of access to her child? Or would she give it to someone she deeply trusted? Someone intimately connected to her personal life? Think about modern parallels. When powerful people have affairs, they often promote their lovers to positions where they have legitimate reasons to be close, to travel together, to spend time in private. Senenmut's titles gave him constant, legitimate access to Hatshepsut. The tomb placement. That second tomb, built directly beneath Hatshepsut's mortuary temple? That's not normal. In ancient Egypt, being buried near the pharaoh was a massive honor, granted only to the most favored officials or family members. Building your eternal resting place literally underneath the pharaoh's monument? That's a statement of eternal connection, of being joined in death as in life. If Senenmut was just an efficient bureaucrat, why would Hatshepsut allow this? Why would she permit such intimate symbolism? No wife, no children. We have no record of Senenmut ever marrying. No wife, no children, no family beyond his parents and siblings. This is weird for ancient Egypt, especially for someone of his wealth and power. Egyptian men married. They had children. It was essential for their afterlife, for having someone to maintain their tomb and offerings. Did Senenmut remain unmarried because he was in a relationship that precluded marriage? Because his partner was the pharaoh herself? The disappearance. Here's where it gets really mysterious. Senenmut vanishes from the historical record around year 16 of Hatshepsut's reign. His name stops appearing in inscriptions. His tombs were never finished. He simply disappears. Did he die? Was he disgraced? Did he fall out of favor? Some historians suggest he and Hatshepsut had a falling out. Others think he simply died, possibly suddenly. A few even suggest he was caught in a scandal. Maybe the relationship became too public, too controversial, and he was forced out. We don't know. But his sudden disappearance from such a high position is suspicious. Okay, so let's assume for a moment that the relationship was real. That Hatshepsut and Senenmut were lovers. What does that actually mean? In ancient Egypt, pharaohs had harems. Male pharaohs had dozens, sometimes hundreds of wives and concubines. Thutmose III, Hatshepsut's stepson and co-ruler, had multiple wives. Ramses II is said to have had over 100 children. This was normal, expected, part of the job. But a female pharaoh taking a lover? That's different. The symbolism of pharaoh was inherently masculine and virile. The pharaoh was the potent, powerful force that fertilized Egypt itself. Having multiple women was part of demonstrating that power and virility. But a woman in that role? Taking a male lover? It flipped the script entirely. It suggested that the female pharaoh was claiming the same sexual agency, the same freedom, the same power as male pharaohs. And ancient Egypt, progressive as it was for women in many ways, wasn't quite ready for that. There's another layer to this though. Hatshepsut couldn't just take any lover. She couldn't risk pregnancy by an outsider, because that would create chaos in the royal succession. She couldn't risk a lover who might try to claim power for himself. Senenmut was perfect in a way. He was common-born, no royal blood, no claim to the throne. He was completely dependent on her for his power. He couldn't threaten her politically. If they were lovers, it was a relationship she controlled. She held all the cards. And maybe that's exactly how she wanted it. But Senenmut might not have been the only one. Ancient sources and archaeological evidence hint at other relationships, other favorites, other men who orbited close to Hatshepsut's power. Let's talk about them. First, there's Nehazi. Nehazi was Hatshepsut's chancellor and the leader of her famous expedition to the land of Punt, a trading mission that brought back gold, ivory, exotic animals, and incense trees. It was one of the defining achievements of her reign. Nehazi appears in reliefs at Deir el-Bahari depicting the Punt expedition. He's shown as a man of importance, leading this crucial mission on behalf of the pharaoh. But here's what's interesting. His name means the Nubian. He was likely of Nubian origin, from what is now Sudan. And he held extraordinary trust from Hatshepsut to lead such a vital expedition. In one relief, Nehazi is shown offering gifts to Hatshepsut. She's seated on her throne and the scene is intimate, not the formal, distant interaction you'd expect between pharaoh and subject. Was there more to their relationship? We don't know. But his prominence, his access, and his apparent favor with Hatshepsut has led some historians to speculate. Then there's the question of the military commanders. Hatshepsut presented herself as a warrior pharaoh. She wore the military regalia. She commissioned inscriptions claiming military victories in Nubia and the Levant. But she never led armies herself. That was handled by her generals. Men who commanded Egypt's military might in her name. Did any of them get close to the pharaoh? There's no direct evidence, but think about the power dynamics. In her position, presenting as male, claiming masculine authority, who better to demonstrate her dominance over than military men? Warriors who represented traditional masculine power? If Hatshepsut was claiming male pharaohs' sexual prerogatives, taking lovers as she chose, military commanders would be logical choices. They were powerful, masculine, and completely under her authority. Now, I want to be clear. A lot of this is speculation. We're working with fragmentary evidence from 3,500 years ago. We're reading between the lines of artwork, trying to interpret destroyed monuments and scattered inscriptions. But here's what we can say with certainty. Hatshepsut had power. Absolute power. The kind of power that male pharaohs used to surround themselves with lovers, concubines, and favorites. She was depicted as male in her role as pharaoh. She never remarried after Thutmose II died. And she had several men in positions of extraordinary trust and intimacy. It's not a huge leap to suggest she might have exercised the same sexual privileges as her male predecessors. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about sex and power in ancient Egypt. Egyptian pharaohs weren't just politically powerful, they were sexually powerful. The virility of the pharaoh was connected to the fertility of the land. A strong pharaoh meant strong floods of the Nile, good harvests, prosperity. Male pharaohs demonstrated this through multiple marriages, many children, and the maintenance of harems. It wasn't just about pleasure, it was about showing the kingdom that the pharaoh was potent, virile, capable of generating life. So what does a female pharaoh do? She can't have multiple husbands. That would create succession chaos. She can't have children by different men without risking the royal bloodline. But she can take lovers. Discreetly. Men who can't claim power through her. Men who remain in the shadows while she remains the public face of authority. This would actually make perfect sense strategically. It demonstrates her power, she controls who enters her bed just as male pharaohs did. But it doesn't threaten the political order. There's another angle to this that's really fascinating, the gender fluidity of Hatshepsut's presentation. In public ceremonies she dressed as male. False beard, male clothing, male titles. But in private? In her personal chambers? In the intimate spaces away from court? We have no idea. Did she maintain the masculine presentation? Or did she move between gender presentations depending on context? Some artwork shows her with subtle feminine features even while wearing masculine regalia. Softer face, slight breasts, more delicate hands. It's like the artists couldn't quite commit to making her fully male. This suggests that everyone knew she was female even while performing masculinity. So if she took male lovers, which version of herself were they sleeping with? The pharaoh king? Or the woman? Maybe both. Maybe it depended on the relationship. Maybe Senenmut saw all sides of her, the warrior king in public, the woman in private. This kind of complexity doesn't fit neatly into ancient or modern categories. Hatshepsut existed in a space between genders, claiming masculine power while inhabiting a female body, performing kingship while living as a woman. And if she did take lovers, that relationship would be equally complex. Not quite heterosexual because she was Pharaoh king. Not quite homosexual because she was female-bodied. Something in between. Something uniquely her own. Here's where we need to acknowledge our own biases as modern viewers. When we talk about Hatshepsut taking male lovers, we're applying modern frameworks of sexuality and gender to an ancient culture that thought about these things very differently. Ancient Egyptians didn't have words for heterosexual or homosexual. They didn't categorize sexual orientation the way we do. What mattered was power and propriety. Was the relationship appropriate for your social status? Did it fulfill your reproductive duties? Did it maintain Ma'at, cosmic order? A pharaoh having lovers? Perfectly fine as long as the pharaoh was symbolically male. Hatshepsut made herself symbolically male. So by the logic of her society, taking male lovers might have been seen as entirely appropriate, even expected. It's only from our modern perspective, knowing she was female, that it seems transgressive. But make no mistake, people at the time knew. The workers drawing porn graffiti? They knew. The court officials who watched Senenmut rise from nothing? They knew. And some of them clearly had opinions about it. Let's talk about what Hatshepsut actually did as pharaoh. Because this isn't just a story about sex and scandal. This is about one of Egypt's most successful rulers, period. And understanding her achievements helps us understand why her relationships were so threatening, and why someone tried to erase her from history. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the most stunning architectural achievements in human history. Built into the cliffs of the Theban necropolis, it's a masterpiece of symmetry, proportion, and integration with the natural landscape. 3 massive terraces rise up the cliff face, connected by ramps and colonnaded halls. It was designed by Senenmut. Yes, that's Senenmut, and it's revolutionary for its time. Ancient Egyptian temples were usually massive, heavy, fortress-like structures. Deir el-Bahari is elegant. Light. It seems to grow organically from the cliff itself. Inside, the walls are covered with reliefs depicting Hatshepsut's divine birth, her coronation, and her greatest achievement, the expedition to Punt. The Punt expedition is worth discussing because it reveals so much about Hatshepsut's rule. Punt was a legendary trading partner, somewhere on the Red Sea coast, possibly modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. Egypt had traded with Punt for centuries, but the route had been lost. No pharaoh had successfully reached Punt in generations. Hatshepsut organized a massive expedition. 5 ships, each about 70 feet long, sailed down the Red Sea to find Punt and re-establish trade. They succeeded. They came back with myrrh trees, which Hatshepsut planted in front of her temple, gold, ivory, ebony, exotic animals including baboons and leopards, and incense. The reliefs show the expedition in incredible detail. The ships being loaded, the journey, the ruler of Punt and his wife, depicted as extremely obese, which fascinated the Egyptian artists, the trading negotiations. Why does this matter? Because it shows Hatshepsut as an economic innovator. She didn't focus on military conquest like most pharaohs. She focused on trade, prosperity, and cultural exchange. She built Egypt's economy. She opened new trade routes. She filled the treasury. This wasn't the traditional warrior pharaoh model. This was something different, more subtle, more sophisticated, and incredibly successful. Deir el-Bahari wasn't her only project. Hatshepsut was one of the most prolific builders in Egyptian history. She built or restored temples at Karnak, including the Red Chapel and massive obelisks. She built temples at Beni Hassan, Cusi, Hermopolis, and Memphis. Her obelisks at Karnak were the tallest ever erected in Egypt, over 90 feet high, weighing hundreds of tons, covered in electrum gold-silver alloy, so they blazed in the sun. One inscription reads, "Now my heart turns this way and that as I think what the people will say, those who shall see my monuments in years to come, and who shall speak of what I have done." She knew. She knew her legacy was at stake. She knew people would judge her. And she built monuments so massive, so beautiful, so permanent that they couldn't be ignored. She was literally carving her name into stone so deeply that no one could erase it. Except someone tried. After ruling for 22 years, Hatshepsut disappears from the historical record. The exact date is unclear, somewhere around 1458 BCE. She simply vanishes. Did she die? Almost certainly. She would have been in her mid-40s or early 50s, elderly by ancient standards. Natural death is the most likely explanation. But here's where it gets sinister. Approximately 20 years after her death, Someone systematically attacked her legacy. Her images were defaced, chiseled off temple walls. Her statues were smashed and thrown into quarries. Her name was scratched out of inscriptions and replaced with the names of Thutmose I, Thutmose II, or Thutmose III. Her monuments weren't destroyed, that would be too obvious, too expensive. Instead, she was surgically removed from them. Erased. As if she'd never existed. Who did this? And why? The evidence points to Thutmose III. Remember him? The boy king Hatshepsut ruled for. Her stepson and co-ruler. When Hatshepsut died, he finally became sole pharaoh, a position he'd technically held since childhood but never fully exercised. And he ruled for another 30+ years after her death. A long, successful, militarily brilliant reign. He became one of Egypt's greatest warrior pharaohs, conquering territories from Nubia to the Euphrates. But 20 years into his solo reign, he ordered the erasure of Hatshepsut's memory. Why wait 20 years? Historians have debated this for decades. Here are the main theories. Theory 1. Personal resentment. Thutmose III resented being sidelined during his youth. Hatshepsut had stolen 22 years of his reign. He waited until he was secure on his throne, then took revenge by erasing her from history. Problems with this theory: if it was personal revenge, why wait 20 years? Why not erase her immediately after taking sole power? Also, early in his solo reign, Thutmose III seemed to honor Hatshepsut. Some of her monuments were maintained and respected. Theory 2. Legitimacy crisis. This is the theory most historians favor. Thutmose III was preparing his own son, Amenhotep II, to succeed him. But Hatshepsut's unprecedented female reign had created a problem. It suggested that someone other than the direct male heir could legitimately rule. If a woman could become pharaoh, what did that mean for royal succession? Could other family members, brothers, uncles, cousins, claim the throne? By erasing Hatshepsut, Thutmose III was sending a message: female pharaohs don't exist. They can't exist. The legitimate succession goes from male to male. My son is the rightful heir. This theory explains the timing. The erasure happened when Thutmose III was establishing his son as heir. It wasn't about Hatshepsut personally. It was about protecting patrilineal succession. Theory 3. Religious restoration. Some scholars argue the erasure was about restoring proper religious order. Hatshepsut's gender-bending pharaohship might have been seen as disturbing Ma'at, cosmic order. By depicting herself as male while being female, she created a theological problem. Erasing her restored the correct narrative. Pharaohs are male, always have been, always will be. Theory 4. The Senenmut connection. Here's a more scandalous theory. What if the erasure was specifically about covering up her relationships? Those crude graffiti images of Hatshepsut and Senenmut? That was just what ordinary workers dared to draw. Imagine what was whispered in court. What was recorded in documents that didn't survive. Maybe Thutmose III was erasing not just a female pharaoh, but a female pharaoh who'd taken lovers. Who'd claimed masculine sexual prerogatives. Who'd violated gender norms in every possible way. The erasure might have been about moral purification as much as political legitimacy. The truth is probably a combination of all these factors. Hatshepsut's reign was unprecedented, transgressive. It challenged every assumption about gender, power, and royal succession. And whether or not she actually had affairs with Senenmut and others, the rumors existed. The gossip was there. The graffiti proves people were talking. For Thutmose III, trying to establish a traditional male succession, Hatshepsut's entire reign was a problem. Her gender was a problem. Her success was a problem. And yes, her sexual agency, real or rumored, was a problem. So he tried to erase her. But here's the beautiful irony: he failed. He couldn't erase her completely. He chiseled out some names and images, but she built so much in so many places that complete erasure was impossible. Some inscriptions survived in hard-to-reach places. The foundation deposits buried under her monuments still bore her name. Her statues, though smashed and dumped, were eventually found by archaeologists. And Deir el-Bahari, her masterpiece, still stands. Damaged, yes. Defaced, yes. But undeniably hers. Hatshepsut's legacy survived. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, when Egyptologists began piecing together Egypt's history, they found her. They reconstructed her reign. They recognized her genius. ***. She's back. And she's not going anywhere. For decades after archaeologists recognized Hatshepsut's importance, one question remained. Where was her mummy? We knew where she'd meant to be buried. in a tomb she'd commissioned in the Valley of the Kings, designated KV-20. It was the first tomb in the valley intended for a pharaoh, and she'd had it built to house both herself and her father, Thutmose I. But when archaeologists excavated KV-20 in 1903, they found it thoroughly looted and empty. No royal mummies. For over a century, Hatshepsut's physical remains were missing. Then in 2007, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's chief archaeologist at the time, announced an extraordinary discovery. A mummy that had been sitting in the Egyptian museum's storage for over a century was actually Hatshepsut. Here's how they figured it out. In 1903, archaeologist Howard Carter, yes, the guy who later found King Tut, discovered a small, unremarkable tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV-60. Inside were two female mummies. One was in a coffin inscribed with the name of Hatshepsut's wet nurse, Ciderin. The other was lying on the floor, no coffin, seemingly unimportant. The mummy in the coffin was taken to the Egyptian museum. The one on the floor was left in the tomb. It seemed like just another anonymous mummy. Flash forward to 1989. That mystery mummy from KV-60 was finally brought to the museum. It was catalogued as KV-60A, an unknown female. In 2007, Dr. Hawass had a theory. What if one of these two mummies, either the one from the coffin or the one from the floor, was actually Hatshepsut? He had several pieces of evidence. First, there was a wooden box that had been found in KV-20 Hatshepsut's tomb. It was inscribed with her name and contained organs that had been removed during mummification, including a single tooth. Second, CT scans had been done on several unidentified female mummies, including KV-60A, the mystery woman from the floor. The scans showed that KV-60A was missing a tooth, specifically an upper molar. So they tried something. They tested whether the loose tooth from the wooden box fit the empty socket in KV-60A's jaw. It fit perfectly. DNA testing was attempted but was inconclusive. Ancient DNA degrades and contamination is a huge problem. But the physical evidence was compelling. The mummy was female, approximately 45 to 50 years old at death, obese, showing signs of a life of luxury and rich diet, and missing a tooth that exactly matched one inscribed with Hatshepsut's name. KV-60A was Hatshepsut. So what did she look like? The mummy shows a woman who'd lived well. She was significantly overweight, probably from a diet rich in sweets and fats available only to royalty. The ancient Egyptian elite loved honey, dates, and beer. She'd suffered from arthritis. Her teeth showed signs of dental disease, common in ancient Egypt, where sand got into the bread and wore teeth down. She'd probably had diabetes. Analysis suggests she died from complications related to a bone cancer, possibly from a carcinogenic skin lotion she'd used. Ancient Egyptians used creams containing benzopyrene, a carcinogen, to treat chronic skin conditions. In other words, she died from a pharaoh's disease. The kind of health problems that come from luxury, wealth, and access to materials that look beautiful but are quietly poisonous. There's something poetic about that. But here's what's most striking. They didn't even try to give her a pharaoh's burial. Male pharaohs got elaborate tombs filled with treasure. Multiple coffins, gold masks, canopic jars with their organs preserved with care. Hatshepsut got dumped on the floor of her wet nurse's tomb. No coffin. No treasure. Just a body hidden away. Maybe it was Thutmose III's doing, not erasing her entirely, but making sure she wasn't honored as a pharaoh. Maybe her supporters hid her body to protect it from desecration during the later erasure campaign. Or maybe in death the pretense dropped. She was a woman again, not a pharaoh king, and women, even royal women, didn't get the full pharaoh treatment. We don't know. What we do know is that she's been found, identified, honored in modern museums. And her mummy, overweight, middle-aged, marked by the diseases of luxury, humanizes her in a way monuments never could. She wasn't just a name carved in stone. She was a real woman, who ate too many sweets, who had bad teeth, who got sick, who died, and who, in between birth and death, became a king. So what does Hatshepsut's story mean? Why does it matter 3,500 years later? Let's talk about the big picture. First, Hatshepsut's story is about the construction of gender. Gender isn't just biology. It's performance. It's symbols. It's the roles society assigns and the ways we embody or resist those roles. Hatshepsut understood this intuitively. She knew that pharaoh was a gendered role, masculine, virile, dominant. So she adopted masculine symbols. She wore the beard. She used male titles. She claimed the privileges of masculine power. But she never claimed to be biologically male. She was showing that gender is separable from sex, that you can perform masculinity while inhabiting a female body. This was radical then. It's still radical now. Modern discussions about gender identity, gender performance, and the distinction between sex and gender? Hatshepsut was doing that 3,500 years ago. Second, Hatshepsut's story, particularly the Senenmut relationship, is about sexual agency. For most of human history, powerful women's sexuality has been controlled, regulated, or used against them. Queens were expected to be chaste, faithful. Their bodies were property, vehicles for legitimate heirs, not sources of their own pleasure or power. But Hatshepsut, by claiming Pharaoh's masculine role, also claimed masculine sexual privileges. If she did take lovers, she was asserting the same freedom that male pharaohs took for granted. She controlled who entered her bed. She chose her partners based on her desire, not political necessity. That's power. And it's exactly the kind of power that gets women erased from history. Think about how history treats powerful women's sexuality. Cleopatra? Reduced to a seductress, her political genius overshadowed by gossip about her affairs. Catherine the Great? Remembered more for false stories about bestiality than for her transformative reign. Queen Elizabeth I? Obsessively questioned about her virginity, her relationships pathologized and speculated about endlessly. Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor? Historical records claim she was a murderous, lustful tyrant. Accusations suspiciously similar to those leveled at any woman who claimed masculine power. The pattern is clear. When women take power and claim sexual agency, history punishes them, reduces them, erases them. Hatshepsut was literally chiseled out of stone. But here's the thing, it didn't work. Because Hatshepsut wasn't just powerful. She was competent. She was brilliant. She built too much, achieved too much, governed too well to be completely forgotten. Her 22-year reign was peaceful and prosperous. She expanded trade. She built architectural marvels. She maintained Egypt's borders without massive military campaigns. She was one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history. And no amount of chiseling could erase that. In the modern era, Hatshepsut has been rediscovered, reinterpreted, and reclaimed. But how we understand her says as much about us as it does about her. When Egyptologists first recognized Hatshepsut's reign in the late 19th century, they didn't know what to make of her. Early scholars called her a usurper, as if she'd stolen the throne from Thutmose III. They described her as ambitious, scheming, power-hungry. All negative qualities. Some even suggested she'd murdered Thutmose II to take power, despite zero evidence for this. The underlying assumption was clear. A woman ruling as pharaoh must be an aberration. An ambitious woman who'd overstepped her proper role. This says more about 19th century Victorian attitudes toward women than it does about Hatshepsut. By the mid-20th century, interpretations began to soften. Scholars started recognizing that Hatshepsut hadn't usurped anything. She'd served as regent, then became co-ruler, following legitimate succession practices. They acknowledged her building achievements and economic success. But she was still seen as an exception. An anomaly. Not quite legitimate but impressive nonetheless. And the Senenmut relationship? Mostly treated as scandalous gossip, not worth serious academic attention. In recent decades, feminist scholars and archaeologists have reclaimed Hatshepsut. They've argued that she wasn't an aberration. She was using the tools available to her within a patriarchal system to exercise legitimate power. They've pointed out that she didn't eliminate Thutmose III. He remained co-ruler, learned to govern under her guidance, and became a successful pharaoh himself. They've analyzed her gender performance as strategic and sophisticated, not deceptive or usurping. And they've taken the Senenmut relationship seriously, not as tabloid gossip, but as evidence of a woman exercising sexual agency within the constraints and possibilities of her position. Today, Hatshepsut is celebrated. Museums feature her prominently. Books about her are bestsellers. She's taught in schools as one of history's great female leaders. But even now, the interpretations vary. Some scholars still downplay the Senenmut relationship, calling it rumor or speculation. Others embrace it as evidence of her claiming masculine pharaonic privileges. Some focus on her as a feminist icon, a woman who shattered glass ceilings millennia ago. Others caution against applying modern feminist frameworks to an ancient culture with completely different gender systems. Some emphasize her gender bending as proto-queer, a challenge to binary gender categories. Others argue she was simply pragmatic, doing what was necessary to rule in a male-dominated system. The truth is probably all of these things at once. Hatshepsut was complex. She contained multitudes. She can't be reduced to a single narrative. Here's what I think matters most. Hatshepsut lived in a world with rigid gender roles and clear expectations. She found the edges of those rules, the loopholes, the flexible spaces, and she exploited them brilliantly. She didn't reject femininity entirely. She kept her birth name, she honored goddesses, she sometimes allowed feminine depictions. But she claimed masculinity when she needed it. She performed kingship. She took lovers on her own terms. She was whoever she needed to be to rule effectively. And that kind of fluidity, that strategic navigation of gender and power, that's something we can still learn from today. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. The really controversial stuff. Because this video's title promised controversy, and we're about to deliver. Did Hatshepsut have sex with Senenmut? With other men in her court? Honestly? We'll never know for certain. But let's talk about what's more interesting than just whether they had sex. What would it have meant if they did? If Hatshepsut took male lovers, she was doing something no other woman in Egyptian history had done, claiming the sexual prerogatives of male power. Pharaohs had harems, multiple wives, concubines. This demonstrated virility, power, the ability to generate life and maintain cosmic order. For Hatshepsut to take male lovers, even just one steady lover like Senenmut, would be to claim that same power. But with a crucial difference, she couldn't claim it through quantity. Male pharaohs had dozens of women. Hatshepsut couldn't have dozens of men. That would create political chaos and undermine her legitimacy. Instead, she claimed it through choice and control. She chose Senenmut, a commoner with no claim to power. She elevated him to extraordinary heights, more titles than any non-royal in history. She controlled the relationship completely. He existed at her pleasure, literally and figuratively. When he disappeared from records, she continued ruling. His power ended the moment she withdrew favor. That's pharaonic sexual power, not about quantity but about absolute control. Now here's where it gets really controversial. Was this feminist? Or was it just the same patriarchal power dynamics with genders flipped? Some feminist scholars celebrate Hatshepsut for claiming male privileges, including sexual freedom. Others critique her for simply reproducing masculine power rather than creating something new. Did she liberate women? Or did she just prove that women could be just as domineering as men if given the chance? I think the answer is both, and neither. Hatshepsut lived 3,500 years ago in a completely different moral and social framework. Applying modern feminist debates to her life is anachronistic. But what we can say is this: she found a way to power in a system designed to exclude her. And part of that power involved claiming sexual agency. Whether that's liberating or simply replicating oppression, that's for you to decide. Here's another question nobody wants to ask. If Hatshepsut presented as male in public, wore masculine clothing and false beard, and took male lovers, does that make her relationships with men same-sex relationships? Think about it. If she was performing masculinity, if she claimed to be symbolically male, if her lovers engaged with her in that masculine pharaonic role, what exactly was the nature of those relationships? From a modern queer theory perspective, this is fascinating. Hatshepsut's gender presentation was fluid. Masculine in public, possibly feminine in private, always complicated. If Senenmut loved her as pharaoh king, was he loving a man? A woman performing masculinity? Something in between? Ancient Egypt didn't have categories for this. They didn't think about sexuality in terms of same-sex or opposite sex. They thought about it in terms of social roles and propriety. But from our perspective, trying to understand her story, these questions matter. They challenge our assumptions about what makes a relationship heterosexual or homosexual, about whether gender is defined by bodies or by roles, about the relationship between sex, gender, and power. Hatshepsut's story doesn't fit neatly into modern categories. And maybe that's exactly why it's important. One more, let's talk about the porn graffiti. Those explicit images workers drew in the quarry hut, showing a woman in a royal headdress and a man labeled as Senenmut engaged in sex. Modern historians are embarrassed by this. They call it unfortunate or crude worker humor. They downplay it. But why? Because acknowledging it means acknowledging that Hatshepsut's relationship with Senenmut was public enough, scandalous enough, that common workers felt comfortable mocking it. It means her sexual agency was visible, discussed, controversial even in her own time. The workers who drew that graffiti weren't inventing random porn. They were commenting on real court gossip, real rumors, real relationships they'd heard about from people who worked in the palace. That graffiti is evidence. Not of what actually happened in the bedroom, but of what people believed was happening. And in terms of historical reputation, belief matters as much as reality. Hatshepsut was seen, by her own contemporaries, as a woman who'd taken power and lovers on her own terms. That reputation is what got her erased. And that reputation is exactly why her story matters today. Let's go back to the erasure. Because the attempt to delete Hatshepsut from history reveals something crucial about power, gender, and memory. Thutmose III, or whoever ordered the erasure, didn't destroy Hatshepsut's monuments. He didn't tear down her temples or demolish her obelisks. That would have been too obvious, too expensive, too difficult. Instead, he performed a surgical strike: remove her name, replace her image, make it look like the monuments belonged to male pharaohs. This is sophisticated propaganda. The goal wasn't to eliminate evidence of her reign. That was impossible. The goal was to eliminate her legitimacy as pharaoh, to make it seem like she'd never really been pharaoh at all. That the legitimate succession went from Thutmose II to Thutmose III, with nothing in between. This kind of erasure is about controlling narrative, about deciding who gets to be remembered and how. We see this pattern throughout history. Women in power have their achievements attributed to men. Women who claim sexual agency are called sluts, whores, seductresses. Women who challenge gender norms are erased, mocked, or pathologized. The specific methods change. We use digital manipulation now instead of chisels, but the goal remains the same. Control the story. Control who gets to be a hero. Control whose legacy survives. Hatshepsut's erasure failed because she built too much and achieved too much. Left too many traces. But think about all the women whose erasure succeeded. Whose names we'll never know because someone chiseled them out of history completely. Hatshepsut is the exception. She's the one we found. How many others are still buried? So what's the final verdict on Hatshepsut? Was she a visionary? A usurper? A gender revolutionary? A pragmatic politician? Was her relationship with Senenmut a great love story? A political arrangement? A scandal? All of the above? Here's what we know for certain. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt as pharaoh for over 20 years, one of the longest reigns of any woman in power in the ancient world. She maintained peace, expanded trade, built architectural masterpieces, and left Egypt more prosperous than she found it. She navigated impossible gender barriers by performing masculinity while remaining visibly female. She had intimate relationships with men in her court, particularly Senenmut, that contemporaries gossiped about and successors tried to erase. She claimed power, wealth, and sexual agency on her own terms. And someone thought all of that was threatening enough to try to erase her from existence. The fact that we're talking about her today, that we've reconstructed her story, found her mummy, restored her monuments, proves that erasure failed. Hatshepsut won. Not just in her lifetime when she ruled Egypt successfully for 2 decades, but in the eternal game of historical memory. Her name survives. Her story survives. Her monuments still stand. And every year millions of people visit Deir el-Bahari, look up at those elegant terraces carved into the cliff, and learn about the woman who built them. The woman who became king. The woman who took lovers. The woman they tried to erase. Hatshepsut's story matters because it shows us that gender is constructed. That power is claimed, not given. That sexual agency is always political. It matters because it challenges our assumptions about ancient cultures. No, not everyone thought about gender and sexuality the way we do. It matters because it's a story of resilience. Of a woman finding cracks in a patriarchal system and wedging them open wide enough to rule an empire. And it matters because someone tried to bury this story and it survived anyway. That's the power of truth. The power of stone. The power of a woman who built so much, achieved so much, that even 3,500 years of erosion and erasure couldn't make her disappear. Hatshepsut was here. She ruled. She loved. She built. And she's not going anywhere. If you made it this far, thank you. This was a deep dive, and Hatshepsut's story deserves nothing less. The evidence for her relationships is circumstantial: graffiti, rumors, unusual tomb placements, unprecedented power granted to certain men. We'll never have definitive proof, but the pattern is clear, and the erasure is real. Someone thought Hatshepsut's story was dangerous enough to try to delete. That tells you everything you need to know about how threatening she was. A woman with absolute power. A woman who claimed masculine privileges. A woman who took lovers on her own terms. That was unacceptable 3,500 years ago. And in many places it still is, but her monuments still stand. Her name is still carved in stone. And every year millions of people visit Deir el-Bahari, look up at those elegant terraces carved into the cliff, and learn about the woman who built them. The woman who became king. The woman who took lovers on her own terms. That was unacceptable 3,500 years ago. And in many places it still is, but her monuments still stand. Her name is still carved in stone. and her story is being told again. Hit subscribe if you want more stories they don't teach in history class, because there are so many women like Hatshepsut, powerful, complex, controversial, who've been erased or simplified or forgotten. We're bringing them back, one story at a time.